Welcome to the Data Literacy Show, the podcast that helps organizations build, measure, and level up their data and AI literacy.
I'm Ben Jones, co-founder and CEO of Data Literacy, where we are on a mission to help you learn the language of data and AI through tailored trainings and assessments and more.
And I'm Alli Torban, the Senior Data Literacy Advocate here at Data Literacy.
Wait, more than that though, right? You're also the podcast host of
this show, plus another one called DataViz Today.
That's right. That's right. So I'm actually super excited right now because I've always wanted to start a podcast. And we work with Alli, who is, of course, one of the best in the business. So she's going to help me learn the ropes. And so this is episode 1. I'm really excited. A little nervous, but
inaugural episode.
That's right. Here we go.
Podcasting. So I have been bringing DataViz to the podcasting waves. Now we're bringing data literacy to the podcasting waves. So we're very excited. This first episode is about something we are very passionate about, which is measurement. Mm-hmm. How can organizations measure progress in their data and AI literacy programs? It's really tough. And there's no question that every org needs to increase their data literacy for their employees. But how do you know if your data literacy program is working? What should you be measuring? What are some of the early signs of success? And what are some of the signs that you should be looking for to give you an indication that you need to pivot?
Right. So, it can kind of feel like a lot maybe to navigate. And so, over the past 5 years, we've been conducting a specific kind of assessment. And so we've been doing a lot of trainings as well. And some of the organizations we've been partnering with have been launching their own internal data literacy goals. And so along the way, we've noticed some clear patterns maybe among teams that succeed and how they measure success and progress.
Right. So we're going to share all that with you today. So let's get into it. Okay, so Ben, let's start with a hypothetical. Let's say I am about to launch a data and AI literacy program at my organization. I probably need to start by getting some sort of baseline of what my team knows and doesn't know, right?
Right. It's one of the earliest things you want to do. Maybe not the first thing. I think it helps to also establish a burning platform or a case for change and to already start to align kind of influential supporters on the inside. But really early on, before you go very far into designing any kind of training program or any kind of initiatives, you want to measure your baseline, your current state. So there's a few ways to do that. And we like to think of it sort of like lenses. You're looking at your organization, think of it's on a petri dish. You have a few different lenses to look at that dish to get a better sense of what's in there. And so one of the lenses would be an objective assessment, right? Where you're giving people right and wrong questions for them to answer to figure out where are their strong suits and their weaknesses in terms of, what they know. So skills-based, knowledge-based, we've got quizzes, we've got competency frameworks and things like that. So we want to be careful with those because people can get pretty nervous about tests. Test anxiety is real. And you want to pretty early on assuage them that you're not trying to rank them. This isn't about their performance. Maybe even make it anonymous so that you simply assess where you are as an organization. What's really great about that too is that you can now use that to figure out maybe where some specific training needs are the most poignant. Maybe there's some topics that your own team members seem to struggle with in terms of maybe getting a lot of the answers wrong to those kinds of questions. So that's what's useful about objective assessments, I think. And then, of course, the other side of that would be a more subjective assessment where you simply sometimes just even have conversations with people, ask them what's working well, open-ended kinds of questions, listen carefully. But then eventually you probably want to maybe send out some kind of more formalized survey where you try to gauge people's thoughts and feelings about how well data and AI is being used in the organization today. So, that could be a survey, it could be some kind of a form or an interview, and you're looking at the objective perspectives of the organization. Some might think that because it's subjective, it's not valuable. I don't agree at all. I think it's really useful as an executive to keep your finger on the pulse, of what people think and how they feel about things. Also, as you ask them these kinds of questions, you're going to learn a lot about the blockers and the barriers. And so this can be super useful to get that early on. And then you can then begin to design programs that address some of those exact barriers that they identify in this early current state measurement process that you go through.
Yeah, I can see how getting the objective assessment and the subjective assessment together would
Yeah.
give you a good view of the baseline knowledge of everyone on your team. Like the objective assessment, you might use a particular tool on your team, and maybe there's one superstar on there who's helping everybody solve all the challenges with the tool. But you don't really realize that until you have an objective assessment and each person is taking the test and you realize, oh, maybe I need some more formal training with this particular tool because I didn't realize this one person is like a 10 out of 10 and everyone else is being helped along.
Yeah, that's a great point. It would be an example of like an individual act of heroism, on the part of one data superstar, like you mentioned.
Hmm.
But that might be masking an overall team deficiency there. And you definitely want to, as you increase in maturity, make some of these skills and the knowledge that goes along with them more systemic, where it's, not everyone has to be great at everything. We'll be clear about that. But at the same time, you don't want to depend on a small number of people to do all the work for everyone else. You really want to make sure you lift their abilities as well. So you're right. The assessment might uncover some weaknesses that are hidden under the surface where you may have been noticing things are going well, but again, it could be on precarious ground. And all it takes is that person to leave the organization or even shift roles, and
Right.
all of a sudden the performance just falls off, right?
Hmm.
So you want to look for those kinds of um, threats, I guess, or weaknesses that are on the team, but maybe not obvious.
Right. And it might be easy to assume that, oh, there's this low level of maturity knowing this particular tool, and one person is pulling the team along. It might be easy to assume that nobody wants to be trained on the team. But when you have the subjective assessment and you're getting people's opinions, maybe it surfaces that, hey, I want to be trained, but I don't feel like I'm getting any opportunities to do that. So that would bring that to light, a subjective assessment.
It's a really common sentiment we hear all the time when we assess organizations and work with them. When we ask for this subjective lens, we find that, lack of availability of good data training is right up there with one of the top barriers that people identify. And so, of course, this is with organizations that are coming to us, selecting themselves really out of all of the organizations that exist to say, hey, we want to improve. They're probably doing so early because they have yet to roll out training. So there's also that to consider. But certainly for the organizations that we've been working with around the world, and this could be nonprofits, for profits, government agencies, we hear this all the time. There's just a lack of great data training and they're asking for it. And
Hmm.
sometimes that can be helpful to allow them to say that and reflect that back to them, and then to meet that need with something that actually provides them what they're asking for.
Right. If anybody is knows data at all, you know that subjective assessments can be really tough to analyze. And can you just give an idea of how we do that with our data
Yeah.
literacy score, just so people understand maybe what an easier way to assess subjective assessments would be?
Sure. Yeah. So we have actually a 50 scoring statements that we put out there. The first one is like an overarching statement, basically gauging how they feel about things overall. When I say things, I mean how effectively is the organization leveraging data today? And then the next 49 out of 50 are 7 questions in 7 key categories. So those 7 categories are purpose, where you try to understand if data is moving the needle or if it's for side projects. We've all seen that.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 would be ethics. Are we using data in helpful ways rather than harmful ways? There's a category dedicated to just the data itself, the data quality, the freshness, timeliness, etc. There's a technology category where we start talking about the tools and the platforms and how they're working together. Then we get into the people side of it, their knowledge and skills of their team members. And then we talk about a category that's sometimes forgotten, I think, is process, but it's very important, which is, are our repeatable processes actually leveraging data, or maybe they're tuning them out? So you can have the most powerful software and great data in the world, but if you don't update your processes to leverage it, then you might actually be setting everyone up for a lot of frustration. So the process angle is very important. And then lastly, we talk about culture. Are we setting up the kind of environment here that's rewarding, enabling data wins, setting up little communities where people can share and kind of compare notes. So those are our 7 categories. So there's 7 scoring questions in each of those. So between 0 to 10, how well do these statements apply to me and my team? And then we average that out and we show them where some of the high and the low points are. So that's our scoring portion. We have an AI component we've just now recently launched, which also adds some additional questions to some of those same 7 categories to try to get a similar look into the AI literacy of the team. But that's kind of the biggest, kind of like the backbone of our subjective portion of our assessment.
Yeah, that gives a good
So
idea of
yeah,
what are some of the things you should be including in a subjective assessment. And there is a question for just free form typing,
Y-
right? And
yes,
that's important
yes,
because you need to give people a chance to say whatever is on their mind and read them and see if there's any
exactly.
patterns. So only a human can do that.
Yeah, so after the scoring statements, then we actually let them choose 3 barriers from a list of 17, 3 strengths from a list of 17 common strengths and barriers. And then we show that back again to the leadership and say, here are the barriers that are commonly being chosen by your team members. And then to your point, the last part of the subjective assessment is to say, tell us your ideas for making things better. So
Mhm.
now it's like the virtual idea box. We come back with some summaries and themes of the suggestions and recommendations of the team members themselves. And of course, they aren't all data experts. They don't all have the silver bullet to know exactly what to do, but they do have a lot of key insights about where the pain points are. And so that can be super useful when you get into the beginning stages of a data literacy program is to say, okay, what's frustrating people and what can we do to alleviate that?
Yeah, and we'll share in a minute some of the top
Oh yeah.
pain points. We'll share some of our
Yeah.
data on that, what we found are people's top pain points, so you know what to be on the lookout for.
Yep.
But before we get to that, so
Yeah.
once I get my baseline, I'm doing a mix of objective and subjective assessments. How often do you think I would need to be reassessing my team?
I think it's pretty much yearly. So if you do less than that, you're risking survey fatigue. It is not a small survey. So it takes people about 12 to 15 minutes to complete it. And so that's a little bit meaty. And so I wouldn't do it more than yearly. I really wouldn't. There are some situations where you may want to push it to 18 months or 2 years, although 2 years today in today's
Mm.
world will feel like a lifetime. So if
Probably
you're
get a
going to
lot
go
of
over,
turnover in that time.
right, right, which can be good because then you get different people's subjective opinions.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's a lifetime. I mean, so many things are changing nowadays, even just within a year. I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't wait much longer than a year to come back and redo it and to see if you made some progress and moved in the right direction.
Hmm. Yeah, and the when we're reassessing and we're able to look at a baseline and reassessment, how should we be tracking
Yeah.
our progress with that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, what we do is we say, here's your score, right? So, you want to somehow, whether you use our assessment or not, of course, many of the listeners are not going to do that. So that's great. You can make your own. I'm just saying it is nice to have one top level metric that sort of bubbles everything up to a single maturity level. Here is kind of where we are. And what's nice is since we've been running this for 5 years, we also get to tell people how they compare, with other organizations out there. And so that's more of a benchmark, not just a baseline. Okay, how well are we doing? How well are we doing relative to other organizations? But I do like to communicate a single maturity stage or level. And then that's kind of broken up for us into actually quintiles, so 20 percentile groups, from 0 to 20, 21 to 40, and up to 100. And so we say, kind of, here's where you are. We put those different stages together. And then what we're trying to say to them is if you want to get to the next maturity stage, here are some of the things that you might want to address in year one based on our recommendations, based on what we're hearing from the team members themselves, and where we see there being some major issues that are popping up. So the high level is great, but for an individual employee, sometimes that's too high. So you need to be able to break it down into metrics that may be more closely related to them, what they do and their roles and such. So sometimes you can also track the progress of your initiative itself, not just the outcome. Did we increase in maturity level overall? But also, what about the steps we're trying to take to get there? Are we achieving those? Are we successfully moving forward as we're planning for ourselves? That's helpful once the design stage has been put in place and you start to implement your data literacy program. You want to track kind of how well you're progressing against what you have set out for yourself to accomplish.
Yeah, it really is dependent on what you set out to accomplish at the beginning. And a lot of times if you just run into, oh, okay, where I'm improving the data literacy of my team without figuring out what tasks do I want them to get better at? How am I going to measure if these things work? It's tough to measure it after the fact. You kind of have to define that first, and a lot of people skip past that.
Yep, they definitely do. So, it's kind of core to data literacy in the first place to track and set up metrics and then try to follow them. They're not always perfect, right? And you
Yeah.
sometimes need to be careful because what might happen a lot of times is human nature. If you set a goal for yourself with a metric, sometimes you tend to game the metric maybe, or there's
Mm-hmm.
a concept called surrogation where the metric itself becomes more important than the behavior you're trying to move or change. So you want to avoid that so that you're not trying to move a metric as much as you are trying to do the things that that metric is intending to capture, right? So it's just a little bit of a warning for something that commonly happens when you set these big KPIs out there. You want
Mm-hmm.
to avoid that mistake and fall into that pitfall where all you care about now is getting the number to look like what you want it to look like. And then that leads to all sorts of dysfunctional kinds of behaviors on the team. So something
Right.
you want to watch out for.
Yeah, that doesn't sound healthy or useful at all.
Right. Nope, it's
Just trying to
not.
push that one number that's not actually helpful.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so let's say I have looked at objective and subjective assessments, and I've thought, okay, I'm at this particular maturity level. I have these goals that I want to achieve with my team. Um, Maybe that includes some training. So we're going to do
Right.
some data or AI training so that we can try to move our team up this data maturity model. What do you think are some things I should be keeping tabs on to see how effective the training is, and things I should look out for to see if I need to pivot the way that I'm training the team?
Oh, I think you just throw training out there and walk away. That's it.
Yeah,
You just add it to the library and the catalog and
take
you're
the
done,
training.
right? It's there. Go take it. Go forth and take it. No, that doesn't work. You can't just throw training out there. We've seen that where it
Hmm.
just gets added to a catalog and then it's crickets. So you really have to, well, on the one side, kind of prepare the organization. It's almost a PR or a marketing pitch, really, if
Yeah.
you think about it, to get them excited and interested. And there's some ways that you can really socialize it and get people happy and excited about what's there for them to improve their own skills. But then now you have to find out how well it's going. So we kind of see three measurement pillars. One would be the quantity. So are people actually attending and completing the training that you've put out there for them? But it isn't just about them going through it and checking the box. You also want to check the quality by seeing if did they improve in some way? Maybe it's a pre versus a post course knowledge check. Maybe you're seeing some meaningful, measurable skill improvements or process changes that you can reflect back. Are they practically applying the training such that you would say, hey, that was a high quality training? And I think part of the quality, but a little different, is the perception of the training.
Mm.
So, you can really get to the bottom of that with simply just satisfaction scores for every course. What did you think of the course, its applicability to your role? How about the trainers? How did they do? Did they engage and interact and help you, get the most out of it? Um, and so the perception kind of can be useful. So those three kind of pillars usually are useful to say, okay, how well is this training going?
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like the quantity, quality, and perception are kind of like objective and subjective assessments where they give you different lenses on how the training is going. Because I do know a lot of people focus on participation rates and how many people
Mhm.
took the trainings, how many people finished the trainings. And sometimes having a low completion rate can give you a sense of maybe the quality wasn't so good, or
Yep.
maybe there was some other thing, that wasn't marketed well enough within your organization, or it could have been a quality thing. Is there any kind of completion rate that we're
hmm
seeing in the industry that is considered, oh, that's pretty good?
Yeah, so we've seen it all over the map, but you know, let's say you compare it to something like some kind of compliance training like regulatory or workplace harassment. We've kind of gone through those mandatory trainings. So even in those situations, the organization rarely, even a medium-sized organization, will rarely get to 100%. They'll be pretty high in the 90s. And every team leader and every the champions associated with it are following up, kind of haranguing and harassing people to get through their official training. So even those situations, you're not going to really get 100.0 unless it's a small team. So I actually don't like mandatory training. I think that it's just shoving it down people's throats. I kind of think of it more like how can we generate pull so that the employees are pulling the training rather than trying to push it on them. And so when you have a situation of pull, what you're allowing people to do is opt into it. You may be incentivizing them or encouraging them, but it's still up to them. There could be some extenuating circumstances where someone just simply doesn't have the time for one reason or another, personal or professional, to join the training. So you do need to leave some breathing room there, I think. And also, again, if you haven't made it so interesting and exciting to them that they want to take it, then that's also a place to go back and take a look. So in those kinds of opt-in or pull-based scenarios, you're probably somewhere around 50 to 70 or 80% adoption. And then completion rates tend to be a bit higher than that, especially when you have cohorts. So they start with a group, they end with a group. You're going to see higher completion rates with that kind of training than if you just say, well, this is purely on demand. You can just go to some library, start it, stop it. You're going to see a lot of fallout there, and drop off, really. Let's say, I guess, people that went through lesson one, maybe lesson two, they didn't make it all the way to the end. So I like cohorts to try to give people they're helpful in more than ways than one. It isn't just about completion rates. That is a big part of it. Also, they get to have conversations with other people, their coworkers, and how they're seeing it and applying it in their own roles. But that's where you're going to get a little bit of improvement there when it's opt-in.
Yeah, we've seen uh, the completion rates being really high, of course, when it's live trainings. But even with on-demand
Yep.
trainings, we have seen clients be successful when they are meeting internally and kind of make their own cohorts and say, okay, starting on this date, we're all going to start this training program. And every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m., we're going to come together and talk about what we learned in the training. So you kind of did your ad hoc kind of DIY
Oh,
cohort. And
I bet you're thinking about the client that I'm thinking about. You and
mhm.
I work with them, we train them. Yeah, I like that approach they did. It's sort of, hey, everyone in the cohort go through the on demand. Let's get together, like you were explaining, and talk about it. And
Yeah.
so then you and I get involved with them at those checkpoints to have a conversation around the content and its applicability. I love that model, because they have some self-study, but then they immediately talk about how they're applying it. And so it keeps them together as a group, it keeps them interacting and conversing, and we see really high completion rates with that program. Sometimes you don't have the opportunity to have a trainer that's sitting with them every step along the way. So you kind of can think about a hybrid approach maybe where they're using on demand, but they have a kickoff and a capstone. And those could be webinars, right? They could be still live instructor led, but you're bookending the course or group of courses with real interactions with real instructors that let them share their own thoughts about what they learned. People love that. And so, how can you program in those kinds of interactions around your training or throughout it that give people the chance to, stick with it?
Yeah.
So
Anything
those are
anything
important.
you can put in your calendar, I feel like gets people moving forward, and people understand deadlines, and
Yeah,
for me especially, I love to have something on my calendar and be like, okay, I'm driving towards this date. I need to have it done by this date. Things like, oh, take this training, it's going to be around forever. I'm really just never going to get to it. So just
it'll
putting
fall
something
off.
on people's calendars, I feel
Yeah,
like that is going to pull up the completion rate way
yeah.
better.
It's like that whole important but not urgent thing. They
Hmm.
believe it's important to learn these new skills, which is why they often let us know that that's a problem. but they have so many other things that kind of can supersede it in urgency. So you're right. If you put it on their calendar, and maybe it's just as simple as they come in the morning and they realize they have a 3 o'clock touch base with their group or with a champion or a trainer, and they say, okay, great. Now I'm going to make sure I get caught up because I want to make sure I show up to that session and, bring my own ideas and thoughts and have something to share. So it can be a good motivator. I think
Yeah.
you're right to kind of keep them moving along.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be behind.
Right. I don't like the feeling.
No, no. Okay, so let's say I am gathering some quantity, quality, perception metrics to see
Yeah.
how my training is doing. Do you have any recommendations for how I should be reporting that up the chain? Because I'm probably in my
Mhm.
own status meetings and I'm having to report to my boss and my boss's boss on how my data and AI literacy trainings are going.
Yeah.
How do you think I should be approaching that?
Well, I think it's ideal if at least the maturity stage, highest level metric is all the way up at the executive, scorecard level. So the C-suite is seeing where are we in terms of data and AI maturity level. Now, they may not get an update on that for a year, right? But it's still part of those goals and objectives, even of the executives, because you want them to open up the pathways for learning. You want them reinforcing and encouraging their own team members. So maybe sometimes what I've seen is, you can kind of compare quarterly or monthly what kinds of percentages you're seeing from each department. So maybe the executive leadership team is looking at that, or if not, then all the way up at the department head level. And it's nice to create a bit of peer pressure there, right? Where they're seeing what their participation rates look like vis-a-vis one of their peers at the ELT level, and they can kind of get a little competitive and have some fun with it. So I think that they should be looking at that pretty high up. Of course, the team that's responsible for executing this training, this is probably going to include some kind of a data literacy champion. Oftentimes, that person is on the chief data officer's team, but also it's going to have someone in learning development, in HR. It may even have someone within the business unit themselves as well. So this core group of people, that's sort of shepherding this whole program through, they want to be looking at this weekly. And so, what kinds of scores are we seeing? Are we seeing some courses that maybe aren't delivering on the value we were expecting? You want them seeing this every week or at least every month because that's their opportunity to jump in and say, okay, we need to make some kind of a course correction here to improve something that doesn't seem to be delivering on what we had hoped it would deliver on. So, yeah, it kind of depends on your level, how often you're looking at the numbers and how. But again, all the way at the top, ELT, what's our maturity score? Let's incentivize everyone to move it forward. And then once you get down into those more program level metrics, that's probably going to be viewed more commonly at lower levels of the organization.
Yeah, and I could see if you're tracking perception, like really measuring perception, people just giving some open-ended survey responses, that can give you a little bit of a hint too that maybe something is wrong with the trainings that we're doing. If something is off and it's not doing what it's supposed to, so maybe we should try to pivot because when you're reporting it back like weekly, you don't want to be like everything's fine, everything's fine. Oh, nope, everything's really bad. You're
Right.
going to be like
Yeah.
checking in frequently.
Yeah. If the story changes all of a sudden after a year from hunky dory to,
Hmm.
not working, then that's going to raise some questions. So, it's like they say, bad news should travel fast. If there's a
Yeah.
problem with with the program, identify it quickly, make sure it gets as high up the chain it needs to go, and then make those improvements, right? So that's your opportunity to course correct and to steer so that when you get to the end, you do achieve the objective and the overall vision that you're trying to implement. So I think that
Yeah.
that's the way to do it.
And I think sometimes people feel like the perception part or like getting employee opinions
Hmm.
isn't so measurable or maybe not so useful, but I have found even something as simple as, hey, rate your confidence in data storytelling from 1 to 10 before this course and then rate it after the course and see how it's gone up. That's a great thing to be able to report up the chain to your C-suite maybe because maybe before
Yeah.
they were complaining, hey, when your team presents their data to me, I have no clue what they're talking about. Okay, now let's start here that we need our data storytelling to increase. So we
Yeah.
start with a low score, we get to a high score, and then we report it up and we're seeing an improvement on it.
Exactly. And then to say, hey, does this track with what you're actually seeing? So
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing much more confident data storytellers. How does that compare with the presentations that you've been seeing the last month or the last quarter?
Right.
Are you seeing improvement anecdotally? So you kind of compare the data lens with more anecdotal perspectives and stories that people have about what they're seeing. Because if you're showing these great numbers, but they say nothing's changing, then that's your opportunity to drill into that too and to say, okay, why are we seeing positive metrics, but
Mm-hmm.
people don't feel like things are changing? I still believe that is important to kind of compare, what are the numbers saying with what are people's feelings anecdotally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you can see when there's something out of alignment.
Right.
Okay. All right. Let's get to the fun, extra fun part, the
Oh,
data
yeah.
part. We always
Right.
love digging through data. All right. So in our data literacy
Yeah.
score, we've had thousands of people take this,
Yeah.
and maybe you can share some of the general trends we're seeing. Like, what are the common biggest struggles that
Yeah.
people in companies are having?
Sure. Okay, yeah, let me kind of give a lens there. So, again, I mentioned this subjective portion. So, in that first 50 scoring questions that we put out there, we definitely see some statements scoring low. So, the one that's all the way at the bottom, it ranks 50 out of 50th, is that my team has access to one or more thriving data communities with members that connect around data and its value. So, that's very low, which I think is interesting because it takes some effort, but it's not rocket science to start getting communities of practice up and running. And there are even external communities you can socialize and let people know about. So you can get started without even kind of doing a whole lot to create your own internal communities, although I think you eventually want to go there. But that's all the way at the bottom. Number 49 is about training. My organization provides valuable training opportunities to help me and my teammates develop the knowledge and skills necessary, to work with data. So that one's ranking number 49 out of 50. So people that we're working with, again, organizations self-selecting to start their programs, they're starting at a point where people say this is just not there as commonly as maybe they want them to say that. Then the next three, so this would be, I guess, 46, 7, and 8 in rank. They're all technology related. So those are pain points. There's a lot of friction with our systems, how they work well together, if we're updating them or not. We have legacy systems. We have scenarios where vendors are locking you in. So
Yep.
they're on purpose, they're difficult, at least
No
from the vendors.
budget, no budget
Right.
to
Yeah.
upgrade.
We're
Yeah.
stuck in some old kinds of legacy systems. So
Yeah.
that's a common place where people do complain. So those are the lowest scoring statements on that 50 statement portion.
Hmm. What about out of curiosity? What are some of the
Yeah.
things that seem to be home runs for a lot of
Yeah.
the people taking the data literacy score?
Well, this is interesting. And again, remember, this is all people's points of view. So it isn't saying it's necessarily truthful, but it is saying it is what they're saying. And we're big believers in making it anonymous so that and making sure it's very, very clear. However, even though we go out of our way to do that, four of the five top ranking statements are in the ethics category. So people are saying that, hey, I do feel like my organization is taking data privacy seriously. I do feel like if I see a problem, I can raise my hand and I don't have to be afraid of retribution. Or, hey, if we make errors, we fix it, we try to get it right. Those are questions that are in the ethical uh, category. And I mean, I think that that's a good thing. If those were really low, I would be pretty worried because that is such a cornerstone. You don't really
Hmm.
want a lot of talented people if you're setting them loose in an environment that's unethical. You almost wouldn't
Right.
want them, to have knowledge or skills quite yet until you make that real clear. So, and then the fifth, the one that's in the top five that's not in the ethics category is an interesting question that we put in there. It's in the purpose category, and it actually doesn't have anything to do with data. We just simply try to gauge upfront, are you familiar with your team's purpose and who it is that you're serving as a team? So the reason why we put that statement in there is that, later on we ask them how well data is helping them achieve their overall purpose. And so if they don't even know what their purpose is yet, which can be the case in some more dysfunctional organizations, then I don't know how data is going to help them achieve it if they don't even know what it is. So
Yeah.
that one is pretty high up. Leaders have done a good job, I would say, making sure people know what their purpose is. And
Mhm.
people like to say that that is true about them and about their team. So those are the high ranking five.
Yeah, when you analyze the results of the data literacy score and are reporting it out to companies, has
Yeah.
there ever been one where it just blew their mind on like they had no clue what was coming in terms of what were the bottom questions.
Yeah, it has happened. And so here's what might happen a lot of times. It could be something like this, where they had just gone through some huge project or initiative, and they were shocked that they still scored so low in a specific area or category.
Mm.
And so, what comes out of that a lot of times is a realization that they need to do a better job disseminating information about what has been improved, helping people, just socializing it. And so it almost becomes then like a chance for them to sit back and say, what do we need to do to really help people see that this has improved? Evidently, they don't feel that it has yet. So it could
Mm.
simply be a messaging kind of a challenge for the leadership. It also might be that it didn't improve as much as they thought it did. But yeah, we've had some times where it's sort of like anything with data. A lot of the times they'll say, okay, yeah, we could have guessed that, we could have guessed that. But
Hmm.
then there's a few things in there that are curveballs that they didn't see coming. And so those are the gems. Those are where you really focus in and say, okay, why was this a surprise? And what can we do to figure out where to head next in order to address a pain point that we weren't even really aware of. And sometimes because we ask these categorical questions at the beginning, and one of them is often, are you in leadership or not? So we show them, here's what your team thinks and how they're scoring it versus how the leadership is thinking and how they're scoring it.
Mm.
And so what we try to watch out for is a situation where the leaders, if they score the whole team way better than the rest of the teams, that's an interesting scenario because there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
And maybe they have rose-colored glasses on about how things are going, and
Hmm.
maybe bad news isn't traveling to their level.
Hmm.
So actually, we kind of like it if it's the other way around, where the team members have a little bit more positive perspectives than the leaders, because that means the leaders are hearing the bad news. That means the leaders are hopefully in touch with some of the problems and they're just struggling to get them fixed. So then maybe they may be getting a little weary about it all. So those are some of the other things we look out for and try to reflect back to the teams that we present.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. That's why I love subjective assessments because
Yeah.
you never really know what you're going to get and you
And
could be
yeah,
surprised.
it's a fascinating lens. We say to them up front, hey, this is not a perfect lens, but it is a very valuable one, and you really don't
Hmm.
want to ignore it. It's not the
Yep.
only one, but it's an important one. There's the other piece to it, which is where we have them select, three of the top 17. This one's really interesting that the one that gets selected the most often, in fact, 40% of people historically have selected this among 17 choices. Almost half of everybody. That's a lot to me, and it is difficulty finding and accessing data. That is by far the number one most selected barrier. And I think that's so interesting. People feel lost. They don't even really know how to get to the data. And it's so important to uncover that, right? I mean, you could do all this training and send people out there, but they still don't even know how to get the data in the
Hmm.
first place. So what good did all that training do for them?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been definitely in a position where, I'm a trained data analyst. I have the background and everything, and we just don't have the data. Like, where was the data? Oh,
Yeah.
it's in a PDF and it's in this PDF, but also this report and this thing over here. And like, I don't even
Yeah.
know how to get started.
I mean, it's a labyrinth for even a
Yeah.
medium-sized organization, let alone a large one. It's an absolute labyrinth. And so, you need to kind of give them a map. And actually, that can be part of the training program. Maybe it isn't about some official external third-party delivered training. It could just
Hmm.
be you getting together with the teams and saying, let's put together a little module to help people understand where to go to get the data.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
we've done that before in some of our trainings. We just bring people together and it's like, hey, where do you get your training? Oh, Jan, or where do you get your data? And someone's like, oh, Jan always has it for me. It's like, oh, Jan has data? Yeah, go to Jan.
Yeah, she's that data curator, the
Yeah,
person bringing
yeah.
it together, and it could be people based, and that's not so terrible. I mean, you
Hmm.
do want to move to a place where it's a little bit, you use some technological solutions, maybe like a data catalog or something, so it's not so dependent on Jan. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, the data curator, hey, that's a very important role. Who is it that's socializing, presenting, sharing, talking about the data sets that are available with people on the team? I think that's a good thing to look into and try to assign that as a task, if not a full-time role.
Hmm.
Definitely someone doing that for the rest of the people on the team.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. That's so interesting to see the data behind the data.
Yep. We've learned a lot. It's really helped
Hmm.
us, even taught us which courses we should be creating really.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
Yeah. We covered a lot today in this episode. We covered how organizations can measure data and AI literacy progress. You
Hmm.
can look at different assessments, objective, subjective, and then ways you can measure progress. You can look at quantity, quality, and also perception. And you can also start your own data and AI literacy programs with just simple skills assessments so you can start benchmarking your team just as soon as today.
Yeah, you can get going on this right now. Of course, we're around if you want to use ours, but this is not an advertisement for that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, definitely go about sitting down with your team and saying, how are we going to measure progress? Hopefully, there's some things in here that have given you some food for thought, right? We've just relaunched ours to include some AI data literacy scoring, or sorry, AI literacy scoring, as well as that objective component. But it does take some time to build one. But you want to get started designing that diagnostic tool for your team, pretty quickly.
Yeah. Get that baseline, start reassessing year to year, and you'll be on your way. So we hope
Yep.
this episode about measurement was helpful for you. If you know someone working on increasing data and AI literacy in their organization, send them this episode. Sharing is caring. And remember to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. Everything we talked about today is going to be in the show notes in the episode description. And if you go to dataliteracy.com, you'll see the podcast there too.
Awesome. Yep. And hey, thank you again, everyone, for joining us on our very first episode of the Data Literacy Show. And remember, our perspective here is that data is for everyone. It's a dialogue. We want to welcome everyone to it, and that's what Alli and I are going to try to do here on the show.
All right. Thanks. Bye
All right.
now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.